Yeah, totally.
Okay. Um, so you've made it to Seattle. That's good.
Yep. It's
And
very nice.
we have been talking about the distinction between the feeling that you can have. I mean, you can just stand on any street corner with your eyes closed in Seattle and any street corner with your eyes closed in New York, and you can feel the difference if you notice.
100%. Yep.
100%. If you pay attention to that, you can feel that difference. What is that difference? The actual part of it is that it's real. It's physics, and that it has to do with the fact that frequencies, whether they're resonant or disresonant or just noise, is all in a continuum. And whether the cycle lasts 100 years or 100 seconds or 100 microseconds or 100 nanoseconds or 100 trillionth of a nanosecond, is still all the same, just frequencies, which
Sure.
is what the Buddha was talking about of anicca. Everything is at some cycle or another.
Yes. Yes.
Everything is going up and down. Everything is a change.
Yes.
And if we understand those cycles, then we can begin to forget about whether at this particular time the cycle that I'm particularly looking at right now is either going up and I like it or it's going down and I don't like it. In the sense, if we get a broader picture of how the cycles are actually working, then we no longer get attached to the ups and downs of any particular cycle, whether
Sure.
it's an election cycle or anything else.
Sure.
Isn't that interesting that it's actually part of the Dhamma is to understand this more westernized, more modern version of the teachings of the Buddha of everything keeps repeating. In fact, this is what the word samsara actually means.
Right. Like the oceans, back and
Right,
forth,
it's just
this
the
and that.
back and forth, just the waves of the ocean, or the waves of the Republican Party, or the waves of the Democratic Party, and sometimes things wave in such a way that it kills them. Things
Right.
die. Things come arise and then they pass away, and they may not
Right.
arise again, or they may rise big time. That's
Sure. So I'm going to make a little bit of a leap, but I think you'll appreciate this. So I noticed myself starting to become more relaxed just a few days ago, before I even got here. Just knowing I was coming here lowered the temperature. And then on the plane as well, before I even got here, it was like the frequency had changed, even though it hadn't actually changed yet. So I thought that was quite interesting.
there's an old joke in within my old friends. We were traveling by plane from Michigan to Atlanta for a big psychologist conference.
Hmm.
And there were three or four of us on the plane together for going from Michigan. And I don't know what airline it was, but the stewardess was Southern. And what the folks on the plane, my friends, were joking and complaining about was is that every mile we traveled towards Georgia, my accent grew more Southern.
Yeah, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Because I was picking it up subtly from the stewardess and others on the plane, and
Yeah.
that's how things get picked up. That it wasn't just teasing and joking. I mean, it was actually there,
Sure, totally.
subconsciously picking up accents and other things like that. But let's go back to that issue about New York and the New York Rumble.
Sure. Oh, and
It's
by the way, before we do that, I just got to show you something. This
Okay.
glass, I think we should call it the Anicca glass. See, it's a curved glass. It's like always
Okay.
changing. Yeah, it's you sit it down, I can show you, and it's it's curved. See it?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
See how it's tilted?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, I just thought you'd appreciate that. Anyway, it's my favorite glass here at my grandma's.
Yes, optical illusions. There is a whole set of buildings in San Santa Cruz or San Jose, one or the other, that is designed to look like it defies gravity, so that water looks
Hmm.
like it's flowing uphill and other things like that. But it's just because the carpentry is all wonky jawed. But our perception is that the carpentry. See, we're so used to looking at straight lines now
Right,
that's used in construction that when we see construction done in straight lines, we think that it's plumb, that it's true, that it's set.
right, right.
That's why the Tower of Pisa can be so striking. But if all the buildings in Pisa were that way, so that they all were bent in that direction, especially if they were mounted on a hill, so that they looked like, because of the hill and all the buildings were leaning so that they appeared, because of the flat horizon, to be tilted, to be upright and straight, then people would go bonkers in the actual town, because everything, so it's visual perception like
Yep.
that, uh, that we expect things to be one way or another. This is why it has to do with looking or observing or being in the here now, is what there's so much power in that, that what we're doing right now. An example of this, you heard me use before the term look closely, looking
Yes.
closely.
Or
Okay,
wakey wakey is another
wakey, wakey,
term.
look at what
Yep.
you're doing. All
Yep.
right. Here's the thing that's interesting about measurements, especially scientific measurements, but we also do it in construction and all kinds of other things. And in fact, when you're tuning a musical instrument, you're actually measuring the length of the string,
Hmm.
but you're not using it with a tape measure. You're using it with a different kind of measuring system.
Sure.
But it's still measuring the distance between two endpoints or two things. This is an important point to recognize, that this whole idea that we're talking about is everything is a rumble and everything is a cycle. That means that every piece of two by four of wood is going to be changing by the hour, the actual distance of the measure.
Sure.
Let us say that you carefully, carefully cut a 2 foot long two by four.
Sure.
Now you take it to the lab that's got a micrometer that can measure micrometers at for the distance of 2 feet, and you'll find out that in fact on one edge of the two before it's exactly right, but on the other edge it's a little bit off
Sure.
because it wasn't exactly square. And yet our mind automatically sees things as plumb and true and square, to where absolutely everything is at an angle.
Sure.
That even the note A that is played by a violin, part of the richness of the note A that's played by that violin is because it's not always the same A all the time, every microsecond.
Always different.
And the reason for that is because the ambience of the room bounces that A back at a slightly different frequency, changing the harmonics. So various musical instruments will sound differently in various rooms.
Sure.
Isn't that amazing? Now, when we
Yeah.
understand that, we begin to understand that nothing is fixed. That whenever we think of something as fixed, it's always fixed just because it's easier to understand that. That it's the human mind that wants things to be yes or no or black or white. But
Right.
actually, yes and no's and blacks and whites really don't exist.
Sure.
Nowhere. Why?
Sure.
Because everything is microscopically at least changing depending upon pressures and temperature changes, which are quite dynamic in an atmosphere that we have.
Sure.
Okay, so we can also see that some cycles are slow and some cycles are I mean, very slow, like centuries. That in fact, there's one cycle that we know of that's 25,000 years. I forget which one they call that, but that's the
Yuga?
where the zodiac comes from.
God, is it the Yuga? You know, like there's the Kali Yuga and this Yuga, that Yuga. You know about the Yugas?
I guess I'm not familiar with that word.
It's a Hindu term, and I think they use it in
Oh, okay.
Vedic astrology. And the Kali Yuga is supposed to be the
Well,
one that we're in.
okay,
And
right, all right. We call that an age or an eon
yeah,
for a technical definition. Okay, and that each one of the 12 cycles on this large circus is called an age, and an age lasts 2,100 years, something like that. So you had the age of Taurus, and you had the age of Pisces, and now
the
you're
age of
having coming
Aquarius.
the age of Aquarius coming into that.
Yep.
So these age cycles also have an effect that we don't even know how to measure.
Sure.
We don't know these kinds of things or whether they have any effects or not, but we do know that there's one set of frequencies that we can say that's from, let us say, in the range of less than a second, right down to the half second cycle,
Hmm.
all the way up to about 20 to 40 cycles a second. There is that range, okay? The range is overlapping the low end of the hearing range, but then it goes lower and lower and lower than that, okay? And that actually they have been experimenting with electronics to have carrier waves that are at such a low frequency that the whole planet will vibrate with the carrier wave so that the submarines at the deepest depth would have the ability to communicate with the mainland. And they put
Hmm.
up one of these big antennas. They had to dig up hundreds of miles of forest and all kinds of things up in the Northwest Territory of Michigan. And once they put the thing in operation, they just had so much mail. Everybody just felt lousy. And that they could say
Wow.
that I could feel lousy at a particular time of day.
Yeah.
And they would easily traced it back to the U.S. Navy had put this antenna in the ground that was vibrating at, I'm not sure to remember what the frequency was, but it was around about a half a second wavelength.
Wow. And so
And
this
it
connects to
was
the, yeah.
just so disruptive to people. It felt really lousy. The whole,
Wow.
part of the state. This was back in the 1960s. It was big news back then, especially if you were in the Navy.
Yeah, totally. So this connects back to the New York Rumble, in
It
that sense.
does,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yep.
because the New York rumble is rumbling at about those frequencies.
Right.
That's the rumbling range, is that rumble of big cities is a rumbling in the range that is, let us say, detrimental to the human psyche because it gets picked up by the body and everything. Now, when people first go into New York, they say it feels exhilarating. It feels
Right.
exciting. It's
Exactly.
the Big
I've
Apple. It's got it. The place is a buzz. It literally buzzes. There's a frequency there, in
yes.
really big cities, and depending upon the various kinds of transportation, that they buzz differently.
Hmm.
Because taxi cabs and automobiles have a different frequency buzzing than city buses and trains do. But
Uh,
in fact, trains are at a really, really low frequency, so low that
hmm.
you could actually hear the uh, uh, the intermediate frequencies within the click clack, click, like that's how slow it is. But it really
Wow.
does affect heartbeats, rhythms, all kinds of things within us. The reason that it's important to recognize this is because we can use it as a tool.
Hmm.
This is part of one's power, is to know what's going on at that frequency levels,
Hmm.
so that we can, let us say, raise above it or take it into consideration rather than being annoyed and driven by it without having a clue about what's going on. That in fact
Sure. Yep.
we are in our environment. Now, in the time of the Buddha, this whole issue didn't really exist in a way, except that it did. He could even see it and feel it in the small cities that they had at the time.
Hmm.
That's why he still wants you to go out to the forest, which is where you're headed.
Right.
But you're making an intermediate stop now in Seattle to sort of like a two-step operation, coming from busy,
Right.
busy, noisy New York down to an intermediate. When you get out
Yep.
to the forest, it'll be like, wow, what a
Yeah.
relief. Almost like taking the big, heavy, hot blankets off.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And just a brief comment on that. Oh, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can hear.
All right, great. This sound okay, cool. Um, so it's interesting. One analogy I thought of, based on how much easier it seems just to practice, here in Seattle, is it's like I was training with a weight vest on. And if you're trying to go for a run with a weight vest and you're just starting to run, it feels really hard. But then once you get out, let go of the vest, you're like, oh wow, I'm going pretty fast. That's nice.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Trainers do that with,
yeah,
in fact, one in particular is tennis. Will use wrist bracelets that are
yeah,
heavy, heavy, 1 or 2 pounds, maybe a kilo or more. All right, and what that means is that then when they're out there swinging their arms with the tennis rackets, they get them really powerful, but it gets the arms tired quickly. But they do that, and then they take those wristbands off and walk into a match, and now they really feel really free because they've got
yeah,
the muscle behind the buildup or the actual stuff. This is exactly the way that we would think about it when Bhikkhu Buddha talks about when you're sick. That's a real good opportunity to practice. That's one of those times
right.
when you've got extra weights. But now we're recognizing that New York City and living there has its own weight to it.
Yes, yes,
It's, it's got a weight to it. And so practicing in Seattle is like taking half the weights off.
right. And the island, it's all gone.
And then back in the island, now you're back to no more weights, so that you're operating at a normal level.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because, you mentioned the energeticness, the energy that you get from going to New York. I think you also get a lot of energy from letting go of that weight. You
That's the
know,
whole point of it. Is,
yeah,
is that
yeah,
that it is a build up strength just to put up with it. Okay,
right,
like when one's sick, and we really get the strong mind going when we're sick. Then when we get well, now that whole ability kind of jumps up. The same thing, just
yeah,
getting out of New York for an average New Yorker, and it's like a huge weight is taken off,
yeah,
and the the power or the strength that it took to carry that weight around. And I'll tell you another one, and that is that people who, if they keep track of it, because it takes a while, there's a lot of dynamics in dieting. But
mhm,
one of the dynamics is that after someone loses about 50 pounds, they all of a sudden feel like they can do things that they couldn't do before,
mm,
like a newfound strength, where there's actually the body gets toned up and they can feel the muscles, and before there was only flab, but now they can actually feel the muscles and they can actually surprise that there's muscles in there
Mhm. Sure.
because of the weight loss. And so that's one of the benefits is they actually do physically and mentally feel better because of the removal of the weight.
Right.
But that also means that while they were fat, that they were having to do extra exercises and had gained strength that was never apparent to them because they were
Yes.
always carrying the load.
Yes. Well, it's actually funny you say that because sometimes at the gym, I'll see a fat person lifting a lot of weight,
Hmm. They can say,
and
how that guy can be so heavy and still be so strong? The answer is because he's got better muscles than you do. He's just
yeah,
got them well padded.
yeah, yeah, totally. And it might be that they actually used to be really fat, and now they're
Hmm.
just fat. And so,
Right.
so yeah,
So that right. So converting that fat to muscle, but then the other fat that's left still hides all of that muscle anyway.
yep, yep,
But it's still there. There's still muscle, and even fat people who don't work out are still genuinely strong just because they have the constant experience of walking around carrying an extra 100 pounds
sure,
that
sure.
you could not pick up and put on your backpack in 100 pounds of weight on your backpack and just walk around normally like that. You really want to take that thing off because you know the difference. And the
Yeah,
fat
no
guy
kidding.
doesn't feel the difference. He doesn't notice it until the weight comes off. And then he says, wow.
Sure. So I have a question about that. So you've mentioned a lot like these frequencies that can pull you down, you know.
Hmm.
So what are your thoughts on frequencies like say like the frequency of the Dhamma, like a really positive, wholesome frequency and how people get attenuated to that, and get attracted to that and that sort of a thing.
Um, the answer is that you're looking at it upside down or backwards. Or another way of thinking is that you're looking at an attainment, or how does one come from here up to there? That's the completely wrong way of looking at it. That's your typical Western way of looking at things. Okay,
Hmm.
there's another way of looking at it, and that's why we call them annoyances, defilements, hindrances, obstructions, fetters, outflows. I mean, you've heard from one place or another all of these really weird English words that nobody uses other than in Buddhism, but they're all pointing to a major teaching of the Buddha. And the analogy will then be uh, imagine a hot air balloon that is ready for the well dressed actor who's playing the part of whatever the musical that are in, like Around the World in 80 Days. Okay. How has that hot air balloon stayed on the ground while this guy and all the people around are having ceremonies? Two things. One, sandbags. Number two, big, hefty, heavy ropes are
Sure.
holding that bag of air and its basket down.
Got
Then the
it.
guy
Okay.
climbs in. Okay, now you got my point. All
Now I
right.
get it.
He
Yep,
climbs
yep. You
into the
cut the
window
rope and it goes.
and then he
Yep.
cuts the ropes and it goes up naturally because it's full of hot air.
Sure.
Okay. With all of this breathing going on, you expect a good Dhamma dude to be full of hot air. Therefore, all he has to do is cut loose, and off he goes. Is that not a better analogy or what? It's that we
Yeah,
cut the
that's a good one.
defilements, we cut the fetters, we let go of our rites, rules, and rituals and way things are supposed to be.
Sure,
That's what's limiting us. It's the rumble of human civilization.
sure.
All of the ways that people are supposed to interact with each other. These things are coming out of the instinct, the nesting instinct, and the Buddha called it silabasa paramasa. It's one of the major fetters. And when you
Sure.
cut that fetter, are you free? But you still are able to maneuver yourself in public because you're out there making sure that you're not going to run into anything, but you've got freedom that nobody else has because everybody else is following the rules. And they've got thousands and thousands of rules to follow.
Sure, sure.
And so this is one of the ways of looking at it is just let go and we naturally start to float. It's the baggage that's keeping us grounded.
Sure.
That's it. That's the entire teaching of the Buddha right there. Dukkha is what you're carrying. Dukkha Nirodha is when you turn it loose, let it go.
Sure.
Relinquishment. Atamayata is one of the Pali words for it. Don't
Sure.
have nothing to do with Mara anymore. Just throw it out. That's like
Sure.
sandbags is the analogy there.
Right. Just get rid of them. Throw them out.
Just throw them out.
Yeah. So I'm curious, do you have other students that have like been in a big city and then left, and what kind of things have you seen when that's happened?
uh, Not generally. No, most of them. In fact, the four or five friends that I've got in New York, I don't really want to talk about that. I don't want to uh, put ants in their pants when they don't need it. But since you were already out of town anyway, I thought I'd let you in on this.
Yeah, sure. Very cool. Awesome. And yeah,
So the city one lives in has a major influence when we're not paying attention. But when we are paying attention to it, it's like, when you see somebody has shot an arrow at you and here it comes flying at you, you don't freeze in fear and let it hit you. You stand out of the way. Okay. So when that rumble of New York is happening, you can stand out of the way. And right now, Seattle's pretty far from New York. So you've gotten
yeah,
out of the way.
yeah, yeah, I sure am out of the way, you know. And so I'm
But this
curious.
goes,
Yeah.
go ahead. Okay. We were going to talk about seclusion, which is back to the
Oh,
forest. Go
oh,
ahead.
great. I really want to hear about that. But just, I guess, one last little comment, then we'll go into seclusion because that's exciting to me. But that's what I'm going to be doing. But you mentioned earlier that if you're aware of the rumble, you can still be in it, but like be apart from it.
Hmm.
Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Um, one one of the reasons why people want to have apartments in certain parts of the city is due to the issues of transportation.
Sure.
But a Dhamma is going to look for the part of the block to live in that's as far from transportation as he can get, which means uh, an inexpensive high floor on a side street that's several blocks from the subway or more. Okay, this is what I mean that you get away from it as best you can. Um, Actually, this fits right into seclusion. This is it.
Right.
How can we best get secluded? The Buddha actually talks about it in this macro way that we're discussing now. is that there are four kinds of places where the monk should not stay.
Hmm.
One is a place where there is armed conflict, in a war zone. Monks don't stay in war zones. You know, the whole zone
Right.
is like, how far can we walk and how long a time to get out of the war zone? But in fact, we want to find out if this area is destined to become a war zone and will leave before it becomes a war zone.
Sure.
Okay. And the same thing is true with famine. That in fact,
Hmm.
getting out of famine is even a better idea because one, the monks are not going to be fed very much, and two, what they are fed is coming out of some child's mouth, possibly
Sure.
a real issue. And so, therefore, they should be getting out of those kind of areas. Pestilence, you know, the four horsemen of the Acropolis, those kind of places the Buddha knows about in the sense that monks should actively avoid going into floods, going into pestilence, or being in pestilence, war, any of that kind of stuff where there's extra added burden to just being alive, to get away from it, walk away. But in fact, I have an old poem that I used to say long ago because it actually fits kind of in a nomadic lifestyle. But you've heard the story of when the going gets tough, the tough get going,
Yes.
right? Typical American.
Yep.
But then there's the other way of doing it, and that is when the going gets tough, the bard go drinking. Now that's the African and the Asian way of doing it.
Hmm.
And then for the Buddha, when the going gets tough, the Buddha takes a hike. You pick up your rolling ball and just walk on by. That's the whole idea of it. That in fact, this is part of the reason why Buddhism has spread so well so far, is because guys just get tired of what's ever happening in this particular place and take a hike.
Yeah.
So, always then, taking a hike means getting away from the worst of what society has to offer, which is always then going back to the issue of going towards seclusion, away from busyness towards seclusion. And so there's also a responsibility in a way that's met, say, in village Thailand by having a distinction between forest Watts and village Watts. And that even in Bangkok, it's nothing more than the whole idea of the village Watts go into competition with the other village Watts.
Hmm.
And so that's why, in fact, at one time, Bangkok was known as the city of temples because there
Hmm.
was a military high ground mound that was well armed, but it's now a tourist point for people to walk up to that point, and they look out and they just see what looks like a sea of temples. But
Wow.
now that's no longer available because now there's so many high-rise buildings in Bangkok that they obscure the view, so you
Right.
can't
Right.
see it. That it's so many temples the way that it used to be. But back to the idea of the village versus the city Wat or the village Wat is that the young boys of the village would go to the village Wat on a regular basis with their family, and then when it was time to ordain, they would go to the village Wat. But after they spent some time in the Wat, getting used to things, then according to the abbot would send them then to a forest Wat to get
Hmm.
them out of town,
Sure.
and that he may stay out of town in that forest Wat or maybe another forest Wat because there's then this whole forest Wat network. And the
Sure.
guy may not ever come back and stay in a village Wat until he's much older.
Hmm.
All of the Wats in the West were designed around that they are actually village Wats
Hmm.
with very little distinction. An example of that is what Metta is a forest Wat and what Abhayagiri But these were established by Westerners intentionally to be a forest life. Good
Hmm.
luck with that because they are highly attractive to people, and so they become tourist attractions anyway.
Oh no.
But all of the other lots were intentionally designed to be there for the the Lao lay people or the Thai lay people who had immigrated to the U.S. or to the West,
Hmm.
which means that they normally have some fairly senior monks.
Hmm.
Because senior monks are the kind of monks that you will have in the city watch because they're well enough off to, I mean, mentally that they can handle the crap that the ordinary people throw at them.
Sure.
But
Sure.
for the training, we want the monks to stay away from ordinary people and stay out in the forest so he can stay in seclusion. Welcome to your island paradise on behalf of the Sangha is to get out there and get away from it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
All of the city rumble that's either coming from the tires of the cars or out of the mouths of the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really lucky to be able to do this. You know.
And so now we're looking at what's the value in seclusion. The value of seclusion is going back to the issue of the weights. The weights we were talking about, the rumbles, the fetters, the mental fetters, etc., like that, even down to the guy who loses 50 or 100 pounds feels so much stronger without ever having gone to the gym.
Right.
Simply because now he's not carrying so much weight. All of that has to do with, well, why then seclusion? The answer to that is that if you're going to learn to play tennis, you don't start playing tennis with big, heavy weights on your wrist. You
Sure.
want to learn to move naturally.
Sure.
That's the same thing as seclusion. So actually, when we're saying that is that we want to get away from all of the external hindrances so that we can deal only with the internal mental hindrances.
Sure.
And we can get very, very good at that. Then we can go and start piling on the weights.
Sure.
But we need to stay out into the forest monasteries for a while so that we can really deal with the hindrances. In other words, the easiest way to deal with the daily news is to not hear it.
Right.
And once you get really, really good at not caring about the daily news, because it's been years since you heard it, when you start hearing the daily news, you don't care.
It's true. It's true. I've been reducing my news content just more and more. And we had the news on today for dinner, and I said, I really don't want to watch this. And, and my grandma just changed it to a music channel, which is much nicer, you know, you know, and yeah, and
Yes,
it's funny
exactly.
because, and it's amazing because, and this kind of gets back to the frequency a little bit, but like, it had on like a video about the assassination of the president of Haiti. I don't know if you saw that in the news. But, and it's this horrible thing, and I'm like, can we please not watch this? And my grandma changes it to Easy Listening, was the name of the channel. And it's just this nice, peaceful music, and
Hmm.
the whole mood changed as soon as that happened. It was really something.
Yes. And
Uh,
you picked up on the change of the mood, and your grandmother may have not noticed.
right. Or
But
maybe not consciously.
when we start picking up on that stuff, it begins to give us that wow factor.
Yes. Yes.
Like, wow, look at the way this whole planet and everything in it works. There is a uh, how to say it, a set of very, very few interacting physical laws. And those very, very few interacting physical laws that we know about creates this entire thing. This
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
show is created primarily through strong nuclear force, the gluon that keeps two protons together. We still don't know how that operates because protons naturally repel each other. So how can you keep them together? That's the strong nuclear force, and that's the guiding principle behind it all. And you can equate that to human instincts at the instinctual level. Is that's the self-preservation instinct? That's what
Hmm.
keeps us alive when all of these forces are designed basically to tear everything apart.
Right. I
What
think.
is it that keeps these two protons together? That strong nuclear force. That's the big issue because all of the others come from that, including the weak nuclear force that is the electrons going around. And how do they go around? And that's directly related to electromagnetic. But also the weight of the protons have to do, and the collection of them together, with gravity. And
Hmm.
so all these four forces, gravity, electromagnetic, strong and weak nuclear forces, that drives everything, but it drives it in such a rhythmic cycling that we've been talking about. And some of these cycles are for hundreds of years. One of them we know of that's 25,000. There's probably even longer cycles that we don't even have a clue of yet. But
Right. Right.
but the precession of the equinox, they've known about that. They know about the yearly cycles. They know about the lunar cycles. We know about
Right.
menstrual cycles. And I'm not talking about white guys in blackface walking around the South. So that's an old Southern joke, by the way.
Yeah.
Everything
Funny.
is in cycles. Everything is constantly in motion, constant cycles. And when we can't see that cycling that we think, oh no, things are going bad. Okay. But basically, no, things are going just fine. Why? Because the humanity on the planet Earth is slowly, slowly, slowly waking up.
Sure.
We're slowly, slowly, slowly figuring things out. And
Sure.
everything goes through the cycles. The Gutenberg press went through its cycles, and now guess what? We have exactly the same thing with the internet, with the various cycles that it's going through. But eventually, much of the crap of the internet will get thrown out, and most of what you can trust. I mean, already people have a lot of discernment. You know which sites to go to and which sites to stay away from.
Sure.
Okay, and because of that, uh, human knowledge is growing, which means magical thinking is in danger.
Sure.
That in fact, at the political level, you can see that's exactly what's happening with the Republican Party. They have relied so long on keeping people emotional that that's their only game in town. They cannot go back to at least the Democrats have the intellectual part, which would be also the altruistic, to where republicanism is turned almost totally selfish. Why? Because of the self-preservation mechanism, because everybody's afraid and all of these other people, immigrants and whatnot, are enemies. Take America back again as if it's been stolen by brown people or something, right? So it's all emotional, but many people can see right through that. Why can they see through it? Well, because humans are waking up. 400 years ago, that was the standard fare. In fact, everybody would just go along with what they were told. They were afraid. Back in those days, what people were afraid of was hell.
Sure.
People are not afraid of hell anymore,
Right.
right? I mean, you hear kids talk about how bad things are in the Baptist churches in the 1960s, that their whole life was hooked on hell. That was the way that it was. I mean, hell was the big deal back in the 1950s when I was forced into church. But now, hell is not much of an issue other than a joke. It's just a cuss word now. Nobody believes in hell anymore. Even Christians don't believe in hell anymore. And I say that that's the waking up. That's the process of humanity waking up. That the church no longer has the power and control over you after you're dead. But people don't believe in hell so much anymore. They're beginning to understand that hell is a mental state that you can go in and out of when we don't like the way things go.
So a comment. So you mentioned earlier that the strong nuclear force is at the center of a lot of this, so or all of it. So one thing this makes me recall is the teaching of John Buddhadasa that nature is Dhamma, right? And
Yes,
I
I
think
just took it to a deeper level. He says nature is Dhamma. I said, dang it, where's my physics book? I'm going to go find the Dhamma.
yeah. Sure. And I think it's interesting because if you're in seclusion or even if you're just in nature, like today, I was sitting outside my grandmother's yard, and I was just really, appreciating the trees and the flowers and all of this. And I find that also to be a really important part of practice and the experience, you know. So like, when I'm, out of, because when we'd have like ceremonies, they would be way out of town in the middle of nature, in the middle of, seclusion. And that natural environment is a very important part of it because there's a certain like wholesomeness just in that beautiful nature. And I'm curious to hear
And
your
it's
thoughts on
on
that.
and
Yeah.
it's on many levels.
Yeah.
One of the examples of that is that when you have trees and plants around, then they clean the actual air. The carbon dioxide oxygen exchange is much more local.
Yeah.
That's why being on an island, being close to the sea, and being in trees, the air is good.
Yes.
Also, there was this was true, I think, back in the 1970s. They don't sell them so much anymore, but there was a ion generator or ion things, electronic devices that were designed to improve the air, operating with electromagnetic. You may not, it was kind of a
I've heard
fad.
about this, like the ionic breeze or something like that. It
Right,
used to be
exactly.
I used to see those commercials when I was a kid. Yeah.
Precisely. Okay, so that whole point was about the fact that plants emit oxygen in ionized form, that it only becomes oxygen as a molecule, O2, outside of the plant. This is something that they've looked at. And so these ionizing things is giving you the most natural oxygen that's already not bonded when you breathe it. So that it's like extra quick oxygen energy.
Sure.
Okay, because it's in ionized form. It's not in molecular form. So that's one thing. The next thing is that plants actually absorb the kind of sounds or radiation that we have been talking about at very, very low. When we talk about radiation, we're thinking about heat radiation, which is below um, visible level, but above radio radiation. Okay, but uh, uh, radiation is there even? Okay, I'll show you an example of some slow radiation. Okay, this is what I mean. This is radiation. It's radio frequency. It's just a very, very low radio frequency.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, this is the kind of stuff that plants pick up excellently because their leaves are just swaying in the breeze and blowing in the leaves. But there's sometimes see the leaves blowing in one way and another, and there's no air. That's in fact that's one of the things that I'm looking at constantly is what are the leaves are doing.
Mm.
How are they vibrating? And they actually vibrate when cars come by,
Mm.
picking up the
I'll look for that. Yeah.
picking up the vibrations of the cars and taking it into the plant so that humans don't have to deal with it.
Mm.
Because otherwise, the humans are going to get hit with all of that tire rotation radiation.
Yeah.
This is really amazing. So look at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
value then of plants. This is what's so valuable about the forest. Is that
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
helps in so many ways. It helps our breathing.
Right.
It gives us good, clean air, and it also mollifies all of the frequency radiations at those low frequencies, and this is why it sounds quiet in a forest because all the trees are sitting there absorbing all the radiation.
Yeah.
And also, the further deep into the forest you go, the less radio frequency radiation. For instance, they don't put cell towers out there. This stuff also has a slight effect.
Yeah.
Another example of it is, and in fact, this is a major issue, and that is AC current frequency, which gives us the hum that you can hear in microphones when microphones are not properly shielded from that radiation that is emitted by the electrical systems. So, getting away from electricity is also beneficial. That's also part of the seclusion. Now,
Mm.
in Thailand, it's at 50 hertz, and in US, it's 60 hertz, and 60 cycles per second is actually in the audio range.
Mm.
That's why it's called a hum, is because that's what we hear. We hear a hum. But guess
Right.
what? That hum gets more than your ears. It also gets your whole body, and the whole body is an antenna like this.
Yeah.
And so we pick up that radiation from electrical stuff. When you're out on the island, you're fairly well secluded from that.
Right.
And that's a good thing, too. So look at how much value then we have by going out in seclusion, just the physical radiations. Never mind that we're also secluded from the news and from the noisy neighbor and from the electric bill and the rent and all of the other stuff that just keeps the mind so clouded and busy all the time.
Totally. Totally.
Mhm. Now, what happens with people when they have too much seclusion?
Mm.
And that happens from time to time. And when we say here too much seclusion, we're talking about more seclusion than they know how to handle, to where in our stuff, we actually are inviting this seclusion so that we can get things cleared out. Most people don't know the value of it. And so when, like in some snowstorms, people will have what they call cabin fever. They
Mm.
go stark raving mad. There's five or six of them, teenagers or whatever, that's up in the wilderness, and now they get snowed in. And then when they get dug out in the spring, they've murdered each other.
Right. Right.
And there's stories about that kind of thing because they don't know how to take care of each other, and everybody is freaked out and afraid. But here, it's just the opposite. Is that we're going into seclusion for the value of the seclusion. And by doing that, we can get the mind also ready for that in the sense that there is now truly in seclusion no place to go and nothing to do on a really physical level.
Right. Right.
At a real physical level out in seclusion, there really is no place to go and nothing to do. You move yourself back into New York City, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of places to go and all kinds of things to do. And the whole
Yes.
city is humming to get you to go do it.
Right. Right. And it's pushing you all the time.
Yeah,
You know. Yeah.
completely motivated. I mean, that's the whole point of the city is that it has a quality of motivation for us that you can actually rid yourself of physically by going into seclusion, and then knowing that you can also rid yourself of that out of your own mind.
Sure.
That's the real issue of the seclusion. That means also that by ridding yourself of that kind of thing, that's also then one of the other fetters that keeps your basket and air balloon tethered to the ground.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
when you
yeah.
can cut that motivation that keeps you tied into society, motivating you to go do something in society, then you can begin to float free. This is why hermits
Hmm.
really like it. They don't want to go back to town.
Right. Right.
Serpico, he got out of New York City and he went into the mountains of Colorado. He would not come out, not even for an interview. I'm
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about what's his name? Alan, a movie, Al Pacino movie,
Yeah.
Serpico. Right. So he's one of the examples of let's get away from it all.
Sure.
Hmm.
I have a friend who did that. She lived in Brooklyn for a long time. She was an engineer, and she got into the plant medicine world, and she ended up completely leaving New York, no intention to ever return, just nothing. And she leads beautiful ceremonies now that have a lot of Tibetan, are very inspired by Tibetan Buddhism as well.
Hmm.
Um, and she was one of my influences that actually led to me speaking with you because she got me really excited about Buddhism again. You know?
Well, now
Yeah.
you recognize that at this level of
Yeah.
Buddhism, everything is Dhamma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is Dhamma, even down to the way the physics works, influences us. And if we understand that as part of nature, that can help us let go of whatever piece or portion of a cycle that we had gotten attached to because it was either going up and we liked it or down and we didn't like it, or vice
Right.
versa.
And also to comment on your point about the motivation, it's interesting. I have a friend who visits New York sometimes, and he said that when he goes, he feels like there's a vacuum attached to his wallet because he's always finding ways to spend money. And and that's how I feel too. Like I get motivated to buy crap that I would never buy, on the island. Like I'll decide, I really want this one specific soda that I like and I'll walk 10 minutes out of my way to a specific store where I can get this specific soda that I would completely not care about if I was on the island or even in Seattle. It's like,
Hmm.
and it's amazing how you get so motivated by these sensory objects, that that are available, and to just be removed from that, the
Yes,
motivation just,
absolutely. Because
yeah,
while you're in Seattle, you might have had enough motivation to walk 10 blocks in New York, but you certainly don't have enough motivation to fly to New York to get a soda.
right, right,
Exactly, exactly. This is also another aspect of the seclusion is that not only are we secluded from everything in general, we're also secluded from the unwholesome states of our own mind, like the soda. There's another example of this that I found when I was staying really at the back of Wat Suan Mok. It was a good 20-minute walk to the front of the Wat because
mhm,
it was, climbing up and down mountain trails or at least hills, not real mountains. Uh, 400 meters, that's mountain enough.
yeah,
So, um, uh, and all of the other back trail part of it, because not even bicycles would go back there. This is all just foot traffic. Uh, and so the idea then is that I'm hungry, but I don't care enough. I mean, that's just too much work to go out to the front of the lot where the food stalls are to get something to eat and to walk back to the back of the temple.
sure.
Now that's secluded. If you want to go on a diet, that's the way to go on a diet. That your next bite is a 20-minute walk.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the same with AA. They say get away from all your friends that drink. you know,
Precisely.
because
This
if
is the
we're
whole
around that,
thing. This is the value of seclusion.
yep,
Is that when you're far enough away from the stuff that would normally be, let us say, a motivation for you, now is no longer motivational.
right,
So you can see then that we're talking about the kind. I think we talked about the law of karma before, because the Buddha was really big on the law of karma, but not the version of it that the Hindus had. The Hindu version goes like this: good action gives good results, and bad action gives bad results. And then their next kicker is no matter what. Period. End of story.
mm,
That's it. And the Buddha says, yes, there is good actions that do give good results. That's possible. And there is also bad actions that will get you bad results. Spitting on a cop will get you some bad results.
sure,
But most results are mixed. It's a mixed bag out there. Unintended consequences,
right,
um, collateral damage, the whole 9 yards of it. Every cloud has a silver lining. We all know that a lot of actions are quite mixed. That when a penalty flag goes off, it's a big game. Half the people like that penalty flag, half the people don't. Is that a good or a bad action, that penalty flag? It depends upon who you ask, because everything is just mixed.
right,
Everything is just in turmoil. Everything's in a cycle. But then there's the fourth kind of karma, and that fourth kind of karma is neither good nor bad, and it leads to results that are neither good nor bad. But this is the kind of action that leads to an end of action. The karma that ends karma.
mm,
Now, most people get really confused when they hear that, because that's a big statement of the Buddha. Karma
sure,
that ends karma. The action that leads to the end of action. Okay, so here's a clear example of that. Going to the island in Washington State and staying there will bring the end of the karma of the action of the motivation for the latte or the soda in New York.
sure,
That's
mm,
the whole point. This is why
mm,
the Buddha was especially harsh on Sati, son of a fisherman, and that is translated wrong, because it appears that Sati in the English translation was talking about this world and other worlds like Andromeda strain or heavens or hells or that kind of thing. But in fact, in the Pali, it just says going here and there. And the Buddha was quite clear that just because you did it in New York does not mean that you'll do it on an island in Washington State. That it's
right,
not the same consciousness.
right,
And that's the profound teaching of the Buddha that is just so subtly hidden that most people, because they're talking about next world, when in
sure,
fact the Pali itself just means basically here and there.
mm,
And so this is a way of the translations, but that's what we can look at. That this is an example of what the Buddha means by action that leads to the end of action.
mm,
And what we mean there is that, imagine this, okay? You've got a really, really busy highway, lots of traffic, many, many things moving out. To stop that, all you need to do is have a couple of police cars put in place and block the traffic, and story's over. The action, two police cars moving, you know, into the
right,
wrong direction, and look at all the action that's been stopped, okay? So, how many sodas has one move to Washington State has stopped how many sodas?
many,
Yeah, now you're
mm,
beginning to understand how this issue of seclusion works. Seclusion is one of the kinds of actions that leads to the end of action.
sure. Well, I think what it also points out is that much of karma is a mental construct. Like the
Hmm.
notion of a good and a bad result is very much a mental thing.
A
And that's
mental
why,
thing.
yes,
And the Brahmins had it all wrong in the first place because they were just using that as a law to justify them being Brahmins, which meant
Right.
politically powerful. I mean, you can see that the Brahmins of the Buddha's time were the Republican Party of the U.S. today.
That's funny.
With the kicker of, and we were Brahmin because we were born white. I mean, born Brahmin. Sorry about that slip.
Oh, geez.
Oh, geez. But then the kicker comes in is that we were born Brahmin because we were good in the past. And you were born brown because, I mean, non-Brahmin because you were bad somehow in the past.
Right.
And you can see that, okay, that's it. That's actually the same thing. The Brahmin's version of the law of karma is exactly the way that the right-wing Republican um, nationalist segregationist mentality is the same law. The law is that we deserve it. We have this privilege because we were born this way, and we were born this way because we were blessed by God, or whatever words they want to use.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. But the Buddha comes by and says, wait a minute, Mr. Brahman, your law of karma has a problem. And the first problem that we can look at is what determines a good action. What's good? What is good? And the example that we would use for a good old New Yorker is you buy some stock on the stock market. Was that a good action or not?
If it goes up, it was good.
So in fact, what we're saying is the result of the action often is what determines the value of the original action.
Yes.
Yeah. That it's not determined in advance that this is an absolute good action that was guaranteed to get an absolute good result. You don't know
Right.
that on any case.
Right.
But it's the result of the action that determines whether the action was good and wholesome or unwholesome.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a big debate, in philosophy is like, did we need to have, atrocity, like art, was humanity better off for having had certain atrocities or not? Right? Like for an example, like to give an example, like the dropping of the atomic bomb, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Like the
I hope I
justification of
have
that.
walking room to walk
Yeah,
away in case they're throwing it in this direction.
yeah,
But guess what?
yeah.
Islands are pretty safe when it comes to being nuked.
They are, yeah. But like the debate though is like, if they didn't drop the bomb, according to Truman, the war would have gone on endlessly, and more people would have died. And so dropping the bomb actually saved lives. That was the argument they made. But then there's
Guess
another
what?
level.
Nobody knows the future,
Nobody
not from
knows.
any time,
Nobody knows.
But
Yeah,
what we do know is that Truman was not completely responsible for the entire war, but he was 100% completely responsible for the dropping of those two nuclear weapons. Therefore,
right.
we can hold Truman responsible and put that on his record as being a president. Is he killed
Yeah,
more people than anybody else on any one particular day or two
yeah,
particular days? Okay.
yeah.
But how many people have killed how many people anyway? So I mean, I know that I'm giving Donald Trump's a rationale for why it's okay for Putin to be a bad man
Well,
or a
yeah,
bad actor. But the point is that that was not really a good rationale for dropping the bombs. Look how if Truman had not dropped those bombs, what a much different planet this would be in. The question is, would it be in more or less warfare? The answer
right.
is, whether he dropped the bombs or not, humanity is going towards peace and less warfare.
Mm,
That we're beginning to act as a species a tiny bit more wisely.
mm,
And perhaps mutual assured destruction was seeing enough dukkha that they
yeah,
recognized that it helped them to figure out that that warfare is not a good solution to life's problems.
Right, and this is the great ironic thing about nukes is they are the most destructive weapons that have ever existed, but they've also stopped more war than any other thing ever has. You know,
Maybe we don't know, but we
yeah,
can benefit from the fact that it's going to go in the right direction with its ups and downs either way.
sure.
That's getting back to the point that everything is on a cycle, and so literally, overall, it really doesn't matter whether Truman dropped those bombs or not, because we don't know.
We
We
don't know.
literally don't know whether it was a good or a bad action, because we haven't figured out yet how to determine the results of those actions,
Right,
immediate versus long term.
right, and we may never know.
And we may never know. This is actually what we're looking at now, is ultimately the 10th fetter that the Buddha talks about. The very, very last, let us say the top of the list is that everything that we've done with Buddhism so far up until this particular point has been to gain knowledge by looking
Hmm.
until we begin to look in the void to see what's not there. And when that's left, there's nothing left but the void,
Hmm.
which means there's an end of knowledge. There are things that we don't know.
Hmm.
And when we're grasping and clinging after the knowledge of things that we don't know, that's just more grasping and clinging. That we have to come to the fact that there's a limit to each one's individual knowledge. And this is why I'm kind of harping on the point that we just don't know, but we can say we don't know. Isn't that marvelous that I no longer have to try to figure it out?
Right,
I don't have to figure that out. I don't have to care whether nuclear weapons are good or bad.
right,
Because look
right,
how much bad feelings the decision brings about on people. Some people really hate nuclear stuff, and sometimes there's some good advantage of it. Why do we hold positions? Why do we take views? Because always our views are built upon the ignorance that we had at the time.
sure,
And we will always remain ignorant.
sure.
The question is can we get happy knowing that we're
Regardless.
not going to know?
Yep, which is fine. It's fine that we don't know.
We just don't know.
Yep. Doesn't make a difference either way.
So those kind of things we will never know. And that this is what we would put into the world of imponderables, how things got started, for instance. I don't care how things got started. I don't even care about what happened 300 years ago because it doesn't really, by knowing it, doesn't affect anything today. That what I'm doing right now is what affects today.
Sure.
And so whether Jesus was actually crucified or not my business.
Right.
Good story, but the part about the dead man walking, I'm not sure about, but I don't see the relevance. That's the whole point is that old stories don't mean anything except when we get stuck in them.
Sure.
But if we don't get stuck in that old story, then it doesn't need to mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. That it's, in fact, when we get stuck in it, that's one of the spreaders that keeps our balloon from sailing off into the wild blue yonder.
Hmm. Sure.
Or maybe I should say the wild blue wonder.
That's a more wholesome way to put it. You
Hmm.
know? Yeah.
So this is the way that we look at seclusion: is that the things that we can see that are in our society that are unwholesome, things like cities and sodas and all that kind of stuff, and we can get an escape from that. And as we've determined more and more and more what is unwholesome, like the desire to know whether it was good or bad that Truman launched those nuclear bombs or not, that's just an unwholesome worry that no one needs to have.
Sure.
It was a done thing. It was done what, 70 years ago now?
Right.
Actually, no, it was done exactly 75 years ago because that was the year I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
born.
45 or 46. Yeah.
hmm
Wow.
Yeah, April and August of 46, maybe, but anyway, yeah, it was before mid-year of 1945.
Hmm.
That was it. So, because Europe had already closed,
Hmm.
and they knew something because they did not deploy the troops coming out of Europe into
Hmm.
Asia. They
Hmm.
sent them home, and the war was still raging
Hmm.
in Japan. Do you know that? That's
Yeah, yeah.
a major significant thing. Why did Truman not bother to send the guys to help fight the war in Japan? The answer was he already knew he was going to drop the bomb.
Right.
He wanted that war over. So all of the guys who were in the Eastern Front or in the European Front were very happy that he dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Because
Yeah.
that meant that they didn't have to go to the Second War.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
But back to the point, other than the facts that happened so long ago, just knowing the facts is okay. But ruminating over them and trying to figure out whether the facts were right or wrong, good or bad, up or down, who's to blame, and all of that kind of stuff is unwholesome.
Sure. Sure.
And the only conclusion it could lead us to is which side to join, which is also unwholesome.
Sure.
That is, in fact, here I am, let us say, with an American passport, and I say it like that intentionally, hearing news about China and the rise of China and the influences of China and the relationship with the U.S. and China. Generally, by holding the old position, I would vote yay, yay, yay for America and boo, boo, boo for China on every point. Now I don't have to do that because I'm no longer attached to America. And so if there are human beings on the planet that can come up with doing something good, let's celebrate the fact that somebody, someplace is doing something valuable
Sure.
without the Americans having to feel like that they're being beaten some competition or another.
Sure. Sure.
Isn't that amazing that Americans are taught that whenever anybody else does something good on the world stage, the Americans are supposed to feel bad?
Sure.
I
I mean,
give you
yeah.
Sputnik as an example.
Right. 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 Yeah, it would have been nice to celebrate that, you know.
Right. And so this is part of the identity that each one of us has, that it's very difficult. Just like getting out of New York and going to Washington State has a certain kind of seclusion. Getting out of the United States into another country to become secluded from all things American also has an educational value.
Sure. Totally.
But there will always be some place to go that will have unanswered questions. There is always the unknowable.
Right.
And we can just literally lay down beside it and take a nap
Right.
because the unknowable is not dangerous. But we
Right.
have to get over the instinct, the natural instinct that we have of anything that we don't know is dangerous because that's part of the survival mechanism. If you don't know what it is, be alert, be on guard. It's dangerous. I mean, isn't that? I mean, we were literally a species raised that way.
Right.
Alligator eat alligator, dog eat dog, human eat human if you're not careful.
Right.
That's why lions sneak up on wildebeest,
Sure.
right? Okay, so they so everything is there sneaking up on us, and so we have that feeling of to be alert because there's a lion out there. But once you've gotten yourself to the secluded island, you don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. So, what are we going to do with all of this excess fear that we have kept in our society? Because there's so much stuff that's fearful in our society. Maybe we can let go of the fear too when we're out there in
Let
the
it
wilderness.
go.
Let
Yeah,
it go, because there's nothing left. There's nothing to fear out here,
sure, totally.
except for the unknown. Guess what? The unknown is not fearful.
Hmm. It's neutral.
It just is.
Yep.
But we've gotten into the habit of being afraid of the
Right.
unknown when we didn't know what it was. Now that we know what the unknown is, what is the unknown that we know? We know at least that it's not physically here to harm us. It's not physically dangerous.
Right.
That if there is a snake, it's a real snake, not a magical dragon
Right. Or a piece of rope.
or a piece of rope. Exactly.
Yep.
And so knowing the distinctions, but now that we know the distinction between a piece of rope and a snake, we can relax
Right.
because we know that it's not going to be a magical snake that's coming after us. And
Sure.
that's the teaching of hell. The
Sure.
teaching of hell is if you don't get along with the society, something bad's going to happen to you.
Right.
And so when you leave society, you can leave all of the fears of society behind. Allow the fact that there's a whole lot going on that you have no clue about, but it's not dangerous.
Sounds good.
And then you can have some freedom out there. You can take a few deep breaths. Wow, it feels so nice just to go places, no place to go and nothing to do.
Sure. Totally. Anyhow, I think I gotta hit the hay. I've been up for a long time. I'm really,
Okay.
you know.
Well, I've really enjoyed our little chat. This has been good to get you attuned to the nature so that
Sure,
when
me
you
as
get
well.
there, you'll really be attuned to the real nature there rather than the nature of the resultants of the place you've just left.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll
Really
call
be
you.
here now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll call you soon. So I don't know
All
when.
righty.
Yeah, but
Okay, we'll
soon.
see you.
So see you soon. All right. Take care. Could be tomorrow. Could be in a few days. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
But all right. Talk to you later. There you go. Thank you. Bye.